Okay, today's I'll be moderating this topic, affordability and sustainability, dual challenges of affordable housing. Let me just briefly introduce the distinguished panels. We have Mr. N. Jayaselan, who is the Director General of National Housing Department. And we have Dr. Suraya Ismail, who is the Director of Research in Khazanah Research Institute. Next, we have Mr. Ismail Ho, who is the CEO of Ho Chin Soon Research. And last but not least, we have Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, the CEO of Center for Market Education and a Senior Fellow at Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs in Kuala Lumpur. Okay, I think just a brief introduction. We shall not dwell too long into the CVs because I think they are all very renowned policymaker and researchers. Okay. Now this topic on affordability. Just now, the earlier session we talked about the property sector. Now we are zooming in specifically into affordable housing. We have Mr. N. Jayaselan, who is a policymaker, and the rest of the panelists, I suppose we can categorize as market researchers. So we'll listen from the policymakers' point of view, and subsequently the market researchers talking about what is the current issues that we are facing, and what are the possible solutions that we can adopt going forward. So we will start by giving the panelists 10 minutes each to elaborate a bit on their opinion on affordable housing. All right, then we'll take it from there. So we'll start with Mr. N. Jayaselan. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. The issue today in our hand is always everybody is talking about affordability, but nobody talks about, we always talk about the affordability from the price range of the house. We are not talking about the affordability of the individual. There's two different things. Because most of the people today facing the difficulty is not about the price of the selling of the house. It's about basically their income. That means after they're minusing whatever the expenditure of the day or the month, what is the left over them which they can afford to purchase a house. So what we are seeing is that we are over-focusing mostly is to create everybody in the whole segmentation of the society to have a house. And historically, data shows that no country in the world can have, not every individual can have a house. There will be a group of people who cannot afford to have a house. And this type of groups have to stay in a type of rental houses that needs a social housing. And you can see this phenomena is not only in Malaysia, but also in everywhere in the country. So basically, what is the threshold we are looking at for people who are not able to have houses or they are not able to own a house? So basically, the threshold sits between 30 to 40%. And we have to accept this, that 30 to 40% of the society will not be able to have the houses. But if you look at the statistic of this country today, which is now we are in the census 2020, there's 9 million houses, formal and informal houses, 9 million houses. Okay, that means if you look at it, that means every individual of this country should have owned a house. But statistically, it shows 28% of them are not owning a house. So if the statistics shows 9 million of the available houses, but there is 28% of them are not owning a house, that means there is a population who are having more than one house or two houses. So this is the scenario we have to accept. So if we accept this, then the question now is that how these excess houses, which is owned by people who can afford to own more than one houses, translate it into a tenancy. That means they rent it out to the group who can't afford to have the houses, but at market value, not at predetermined value. Then we have to see during the predetermined value by the market force, what is the government support? So if the government support comes in, we have two types of government support can come in. One is on the social housing. That also we have a limitation because the numbers which is the government can build using the public funding that which comes from everybody, there is a limitation. So at this moment, the limitation works about roughly in a year, we cannot go more than 10,000. Basically, past 3-4 years, we are only building about roughly about 2,000 to 3,000. So that means there is a vacuum or a gap there. So this is where the programs by the government, we have to look at it to support, to sustain the rental methodology, to support this group. If they can come out of these segmentations, then we move them into the right segmentation to purchase the right value houses for them based on their affordability. So the question here always is that we are talking about affordable houses. When we are talking about affordable houses, what is affordable? Is it the house is affordable or the purchaser is affordable to buy the house? We are talking about affordable is by setting a price of the value of the house. How can you set a value of house and say this is an affordable house? So you set at 300, you set at 200, and you name it as affordable houses. To whose eye is affordable? Is it to the eye of the purchaser? He might earn 5,000, but his cost of living always goes up. There is no historical data to show cost of living went down. Even during COVID, it goes up. Even you can see the story of people running after the Gardenia van to buy bread, but only happened for 1 week. The following week, you see the breads is already available everywhere. So that means we have always a short-term memory only of hardship. Okay? Even though it's long period, but we always have a short-term memory only. So basically, we are talking about affordable is the question here we have to pose, affordable to whom? Because we are talking about affordable house. We have normally spoken affordability of the individual to purchase a house. If you have spoken about affordability of purchasing a house, then, and we are putting a range now. If your income is 3,000, you can afford to buy a house of value of 200,000. Is it true? If it is true, means everybody can have a house. But it's still not true because the 3,000 is a question mark. 3,000 which location? 3,000 with what? How many family members? 3,000 with what kind of education the children are going through? So we have not calculated this. We are just giving a number and we are saying to the developer will say, I am providing an affordable house. Who determined the affordable house price? Was the developers who determined that it's affordable? Was the state who determined it is affordable? Or the government have dictated it is affordable? Or the purchaser who dictated it is affordable? But you will see the advertisement say, we are providing affordable home. So affordable house and affordable home, is it the same? House is affordable. Home is not affordable. Because home is a place I want to stay. So, if I stay in an affordable home, is it my home is affordable? Yes, my home is. If you say the home is affordable, I put a question to you now. If my home is 50 miles from my house, my working place, is it it is an affordable home? I'm losing my I'm going to have extra cost on my transportation. Nowadays, how many people cooks in the house? That's why the developers are designing the house more bigger living room and smaller kitchen. Because nobody goes to the kitchen anymore already. And you can see all their show unit. The design is always the living room is lavish, the bedroom is lavish, but the kitchen is like going to asking the Grab to supply and you use the microwave to heat the food. So you see the concept also is changing. So what we have is affordable living and other issues. Now I will talk later.
Thank you, Mr. Jaya. So, you're talking about the definition of affordable housing, and that is relative to a lot of factors, not just on pricing alone. But what does the National Housing Policy says?
What we have done is that we have used median multiply. But it's a crude calculation, median multiply, because there is other methodology also, cost burden also. Like Australia is using cost burden. Cost burden is that whatever you have 40% of the income balance, so I use this 40% to see whether I can afford to buy a house or not. So to us, at this moment, we are suggesting that we cannot use one model and determine the whole thing. That means we cannot use median multiple as the answer. We must also look at cost burden. That means it must be a mix and match formula. But unfortunately, the world of economy, they always love to use one method and cast it. There, she's disagree. But I have not seen any academic article using more than one methodology to argue. So we are saying that we have to use more than one methodology. Now, I'll leave it to Dr. Suraya to argue about it.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll invite Dr. Suraya to give her views on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and distinguished panelists. Sorry, there you are. Not enough coffee. Distinguished panelists and guests, thank you for affording me the opportunity to discuss a little bit on this really pressing issue of the nation. Before I look into the affordability issues and definition, I think it's very important to understand that most countries have different ratio contingent on the rate of development that they are in, the income of the cities, normally it's at the metropolis area, as well as contingent on the supply side, how efficient is the construction industry as well as the real estate property in developing a very good supply of houses to the metropolis, to the people in the city. But that doesn't just mean new stock. In terms of affordability, because we have maintenance, also we are looking into the construction industry or small-scale builders to ensure that your houses are all the time creating the value that you want. This is important, why we need both new stock as well as existing stock to be in good quality condition, because this is one of the other reasons why we have housing need that is not met, because some buildings are left to be derelict and after that vacant, and after that it becomes a slum. So we do need to understand the terrain of buildings that we have in our country in order for us to devise policies. I look at I did a paper for this, 20 pages, but I'm not going to read all 20 pages. Official statistics from most developed countries suggest that houses are one of the most valuable assets in most countries. For example, in the UK, houses in Britain were valued at a GBP 5.5 trillion, accounting for 62% of the UK's net worth at the end of 2015, rising 48.7% from 20 years. So this is a paradox. Huh? It's an asset and it's a shelter. So this is also the issue about making houses affordable. So because of all these conflicting interests, the provision of good quality housing with decent prices and decent rents will still remain one of the main challenges for government, for Mr. Jaya lah, kesian dia. Because it's a paradox. It will always be a paradox. So the guiding principle is to ensure that when you provide for the B40 or B20 or B10, that we view that as a provision of shelter, renting, not as a drain to government fiscal consideration, but rather towards a broader agenda of guiding and managing the housing sector comprehensively. Some countries, like for example Finland, they have government public-private partnership. They ensure that the 10% of the bottom population income strata will get 10% of the houses there. There's no mismatch of supply and demand. I heard there was someone from Pakistan this morning. I'm sorry to say, Pakistan, your numbers are really bad, sorry. The formal sector, because we did some work from CEIC, the household share of about 60%, 63% of the people there can only have about less than 1% of the formal housing. That's a real mismatch of supply and demand. So what we want is something that is durable and comprehensively managed. And in order to do that, we must strengthen the contingent factors of both demand and supply. So, for example, when we have severe housing shortages, we have unaffordability. So you have you have utility maximizing households, of course. You want your value to go up. And you have profit maximizing firms. So this sometimes will create, if not regulated in a way that it should. We are not pro government intervention per se, but if there is a monopolistic consideration, if there are oligopolistic consideration, then other symptoms of that market inefficiency will come out, which is speculative purchases, substandard housing, high vacancy rates, and rapid house price escalation. This is the outcome of inefficiencies of the market. So this is when government can help and facilitate so that less people are in severe, dire straits. Because if you don't, the resultant effect will be decreased affordability of a significant proportion of society. Now, affordability, back to that question. Ada 60 indicator. There's 3 main ones: median, multiple, housing cost, and residual balance. Now, what we do is we don't just look at one. And again, median, multiple is meant to look at what is the level of your country's maturity. For example, there's this paper by Glazer and Gyuko, MIT. In some high-cost cities, high-income household can spend up to 40 to 50% on housing costs. But in some cities, no, 30%. Some cities treat 3 median multiple or less. Dallas can have, kalau kita nak cakap developed country, Dallas can have 3.2 affordability punya threshold. So there are reasons why they can do it, so we'll explore later. But just to explain that all these indicators are for us to think on our own 2 feet. How best do we address affordability issues in our country? There was a World Bank punya report last year that says that up to 70% in KL, you should use a median 3. But after that, the top 30% of the country, of the KL or greater KL, you can go up to 4 to 5, depending on the financialization of housing, of course. So it all boils down to having enough data for us to make that discussion on the demarcation of which ought to be done either way. But if we have proper market segmentation, if we have proper competition, it shouldn't have all this for government to intervene. If competition will bring prices down, competition will not bring prices up. So this is a very interesting scenario we have in our country. I think I'll stop there, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Suraya. So that's interesting to note that we should also look at the existing stock all right, instead of the primary market stock. But I'll reserve that to be discussed later. Let's move on to the next speaker, Mr. Ismail Ho, to elaborate and give his views.
Thank you very much, Suraya Michael. First, before I start, of course, I'd like to thank the organizer. Thank you very much for inviting Ho Chin Soon Research, myself, for today's sharing session again. Now, Mr. Moderator, I want to bring this topic a bit closer to even myself personally, if I may share. Of course, Ho Chin Soon Research, we've been in the industry about 32, 33 years. But myself, personally, I joined in only 2012. So that one is considered like a toddler. I'm like a toddler compared to a lot of our veterans here today. But what I want to share is that back then when I was a much younger man, several kg lighter, right? When I joined the industry, one of the topic is immediately affordable housing because I was in that age group. You are looking for housing. And this is it's like my pet subject. I follow it. Regardless of which government it was, which budget speech, which initiative, I follow. I want as much information. It may not even be my interest in terms of monetizing the research or whatnot. So 8-9 years been following this topic, and unfortunately, the bulk of it that we are still talking about the same thing. So let me elaborate a little bit. Maybe for today's session, there are 3 very simple points that maybe I want to touch on. The first, of course, Mr. Jayaselan has already mentioned, the key is talking about location, right? So, Ho Chin Soon Research, we are map makers, we are very simple people. Every time government talk about number of units, my first response is that, okay, everyone can say, we're going to be 1 million in 10 years, units. We can say we are building 500,000 in 5 years, and whatnot, all the numbers. My simple question since day one has always been, okay, kat mana? Simple. Now, why the emphasis is on location first? Because if you look at cities, how cities develop, how they thrive, at the end of the day, regardless your size, whether your property has 47 features or facilities, at the end of the day, almost everybody, you have to get up, go to work, cari makan, come back. So that proximity with economic activity area to us is key, very key. Before we even talk about affordable level, all that of course is very important. But our stress is always on location first. So maybe I will elaborate further given the chance. So we'll talk about proximity. And maybe I want to interact a bit with our audience today. When we talk about proximity, we talk about traveling time as well. So can I make a statement, and if it applies to you, you raise your hand? I love to do this. Can? Very simple. Who in this room, if you travel to work from your house to your workplace on a normal working day, more than 1 hour, raise your hand. Roughly lah. Okay, don't have. Tak ada. We're going to analyze. How many of us travel within 45 minutes to 1 hour? House to workplace. Okay, right. 30 minutes to 45 minutes. 15 minutes and below. These are all the bosses, a lot of money on. So that Michael give you a good idea how important proximity is for businesses. So next time for marketing agent training, very easy. You see prospect, you ask her, how long you take? Oh, more than an hour. Okay, never mind. Later I get someone to service you. Okay, so that aside. So location, maybe I want to elaborate further later. Number 2 is this whole responsibility. Now, when we use the word responsibility, people feel like, alamak, ni tanggung jawab lah. Can I push it on somebody else's plate, you know? Government will push on developer push on, it goes around. So let's use a different word. So who is going to be the hero? So just now I started with saying, after being several years in the industry, I've changed a bit, but I still believe I look at myself as someone very idealistic. I live in a world where I hope one day federal government, state government, all can hold hands, jalan-jalan, and then they can discuss, they can come up with solution. So very idealistic. Maybe we can explore further later. And then number 3, which is my final, the bulk of the thing that I want to highlight, is actually talking about unlocking land potential. So it ties up a little bit with the first point and the second point. We always talk about location. We talk about, if you notice throughout the trend, regardless of which government, which officer, the conversation somehow it will go towards this statement where we say, we tak ada tanah. We don't have suitable land. So, if given the chance, I would like to give out some ideas from my side. I call it interesting ideas. Some people say it's insensitive. I say interesting. Some people say it's controversial. I have some new ideas, some old ideas to share. Okay, with that, I think I pass back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail. So you're talking about affordability versus locational proximity to your homes. Okay. So now, and you also mentioned about unlocking land potential, I suppose. And are you going to elaborate on that or subsequently?
Okay, maybe I just give you 2 pointers.
Yeah, please.
Just the word. Number 1, Malay Reserve. Number 2, army camps. So if there is interest from the floor, I will elaborate further.
Are there interests on the floor?
Tak ada. Oh, okay, some nodding. Okay, perhaps.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Now,
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. In a nutshell, if we look at urban area, you look at opportunity. Developers love to look for land, right? So on our map, we indicate where the land, where the transaction, what's happening, etc. And then there's this very peculiar color on my map. So for example, I give a Greater KL. It's orangey color on our map, and it's Malay Reserve. Most developer, when I say, oh, this one Malay Reserve area, they say, okay, no need come, let's look at other places. They straight away lose interest. So my question is, I've been talking about this for many years. I cakap, when are we going to have the conversation about relooking? Some people say I use the word revamp. They say, whoa, Ishmael, whoa, ni benda sensitif, no, ni hak orang Melayu, tak boleh. So the conversation never started. So I caveat a bit. Myself is half Malay, half Chinese. Most Malay maybe say, Ismail, you tak cukup Melayu, so don't talk about this topic. But as a research perspective, I think it's something that we as a nation have to really look at it, because there is a lot of opportunity. Urban area, they are just kampung. They are one-story kampung. And then we go to our youngster, we cakap tak ada tanah. So, my perspective is not very technical. It's just as simple, where's the unit? Where's the tanah? Hey, how come there's this large tracts of land that are untouched, undeveloped, just because your status is Malay Reserve? Tanah Rizab Melayu, tak boleh buat apa-apa. Susah nak buat. Developer avoid, bank avoid. You know, these are really one way to solve. Because if we want to just solve what's the next 1 year, 3 years, next election, then we use the short-term approach. If you want the long-term approach, you need someone to say, okay, let's relook at this. There's a lot of land undeveloped. Their potential is not being unlocked. Let's look again at them. So that is Malay Reserve. The one that I mentioned about army camps. So one of the argument is that federal government, state government, land matter is state matter, susah. Maybe federal want to do something, state not so helpful. So ties back to my second point, which is who wants to be the developer, right? Who wants to be the hero? Why we are looking at this issue is because it is considered one of election issue. Can you solve affordable housing? If you remember back, maybe 6-8 years back, economy was good, people was earning good money. People want to own the property. Of course, at the moment, you don't feel the pressure because people are more worried about their job security at this juncture. But once that hilang, 2 years, 3 years, the pressure going to come back again. So if we're still going to use the same method, how we want to address, which is like delegate a bit to developer, do some initiative, which is a lot not very successful. We can talk about it later. Dr. Suraya, so I'm sure she'd been following. Just last For example, last month news talking about Prima, about 24 projects being cancelled out of 94. That is like a quarter. So if your methodology, quarter of whatever you were trying to do, but it's being cancelled, something's not right. Okay, if you're talking about 5%, okay, maybe those are exceptional cases. So coming back to my point, Army Camp, so it is something land banks that federal government can look at. Work together with state government, and then there are infrastructures, existing, not future, existing, that can actually support. So I have a few examples to talk about. Places like Wadibur Camp, Cantonment, Sungai Besi Army Camp. So, question mark, how to approach? Is it something to look at? Or would the state government or federal government just say, oh, let's just monetize? Goes to the highest bidder, the so-called developer will chop out the land and sell them, make money. And that is very short-term approach. You want long-term, government have to be the hero, regardless. So that one, I'm very sorry, very idealistic, but I will keep that perspective until there's big changes in that sense. Okay? So Michael, I pass back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ismail. That's a very refreshing idea on unlocking land potentials. So before that, I think we will reserve that debate or discussion towards the end. Let's hear from Dr. Carmelo on his views before we actually delve deeper into what Ishmael has proposed and maybe some other issues that Mr. Jaya and Dr. Suraya has put up. Okay, Doctor?
Thank you very much. I actually have some slides, if they can be projected. So, I can follow. Okay. So, thank you very much to the organizer for having invited me. Okay, this one I can use to move. Okay. My presentation is titled Getting Affordability Right. So, actually some of the points that I will touch has been already touched, and I'm happy to see that the other speakers, we have some common points. This is quite a big step, I think. And possibly we can work together on something. Why I say getting affordability right? Probably the ones that follow the things that I write knows that I tend always to make the criticalities implied in policies to emerge. So the first point that I want to highlight is that when we discuss policy, we have to set our mind in what it is called the economic way of thinking. And according to this way of thinking, economic actions, including policies, have consequences. And some of the consequences are intended consequences in line with the desired outcome, but many of the consequences of policies are unintended consequences, which means they are not in line with the desired outcome. Some of these unintended consequences can be bad. So when we design policy, including housing policy, we have to recognize complexity. And when we recognize the reality as complex, we must become humble in design policy making. So over-ambitious targets are unrealistic, but not only unrealistic, are potentially harmful and producing a lot of unintended consequences. So point one, unintended consequences. Point two, the importance of recognizing trade-offs. And we have seen this all during the COVID period. In policy making, there are no silver bullets. So you do something, you hope that you achieve something good with that policy, but you always have what the Pink Floyd called the dark side of the moon. So you have to take into consideration the other aspects. So, example, home ownership as a trade-off with household debt. So when we push for home ownership, we have also to be conscious that we are pushing people toward debt. So it is a difficult balance to be achieved. Another trade-off is that home ownership and debt are opposed to flexibility and mobility. Probably when 9 years ago I made a choice to accept a job here, I would not have accepted if I had a 25 years loan on a house. So the fact that I was not a homeowner made possible for me to come over and start a new life here, and that was so far a good choice for me. So it's not always black and white. There are a lot of gray things, gray situations that need to be understood, and we must faham that. So the things that we need to consider when we discuss affordability are four, according to me. How to measure affordability. If in Malaysia affordability and home ownership are actually a real issue, the role of the secondary market, and the importance of what I call social mobility. So first, how to measure affordability. It has been already said, the usual method, which is called also PIR, price-income ratio, is not a good index for several reasons. First of all, it's too simplistic. Secondly, it doesn't take into account not only location, location sensu lato, so in a broader way, location means connectivity, means job opportunities. You want to be in a certain location not only because it's close to your job, but also because there are good jobs nearby. And here we will come back later to the issue of social mobility. And a low PIR, a low price-income ratio, could be also the fact due to bad area. So that homes are affordable because that is not a nice area, not a place where the people want to live. So we need now, I think, a new index that take into account this complexity, and we are working on it. And it has been already mentioned, affordability is not only a price issue, in fact is also an income issue, and we need a broader strategy for boosting economic growth, for making home affordable from a different perspective, the perspective that Mr. Jaya was mentioning at the very beginning. Second, very briefly, is home ownership and affordability a real issue in Malaysia? In the sense that if you look at 2019 data, we have a 76.9% of home ownership in Malaysia, 74.5% in urban areas, and 86.4% in rural areas. So coming back to the importance of trade-offs, home ownership as a dogma can push up household debt. And now in Malaysia, household debt is 82.7% of the GDP, 1.25 trillion ringgit Malaysia, and residential property account for more than half of that debt. So when we are doing policy making, there are no silver bullets. So as a policymaker, we must recognize the real emergency. So with a 76% of home ownership and 82% on GDP of household debt, which one is the emergency that policymakers should address? I strongly believe that now it is household debt rather than home ownership. So we should shift policy focus. Third, the role of secondary market. I think that the discussion on affordability is terribly unbalanced toward the prices on the primary market, but most of transactions in property market happen in the secondary one. And prices there are much more interesting than what we are used to believe. So we should devote a little bit more attention to this. Last point, the importance of social mobility. So I think that we need to shift the discussion from affordability per se to social mobility. In a nutshell, it's not a problem to be born poor. I was born poor. My mom was a maid, my father was a truck driver. I started working when I was 12 years old. But the issue is Malaysia a country in which if you are born poor, there are the conditions, if you work hard, if you deserve it, if you study, not to be poor anymore, and therefore you can afford to buy a house not because the government gives it to you, but because there is a social mobility in place. So to buy a house becomes a free choice dictated by your economic possibilities. This is the real key. The real point is not to give houses to the poor. A poor with a house is still a poor with a house. But I wish to see progress on the way in which poor are no more poor, and because they are no more poor, they can, if they want, afford to buy a house. If they want to go and live in the United States, in Australia, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, they just go and work somewhere else. So the importance of social mobility and freedom of choice. Final point, in order to propose something very practical to address the issue of affordability for the real poor people, I would, as it was already mentioned, shift the discussion from ownership to affordable shelter with a rental scheme. What Jane Jacobs in 1961 proposed for New York, the guaranteed rent model. This is a model according to which the government discuss with the developers, and the developers built houses in good locations from a social mobility perspective. Some of these units are reserved for the poor people, and the rent is subsidized partially, totally, and surely temporarily, it must be temporarily, by the government. So the developers have the certainty that that unit is not going to be an economic loss, and the poor people have access to good locations through a scheme of subsidies. And this, I think, will help to move from poverty to mobility. So from the issue of ownership to the issue of flexibility. That's, I think, the direction where we should move. I think that in the most recent discussions, these topics have been highlighted, and recently the government have expressed the desire to work more on rental schemes, and I think there is room for a common ideal synergies on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Carmelo. So I think the common so-called agreement between all the panelists is the definition of affordable housing must be established correctly, not just purely on the income aspect, but also on connectivity, job opportunities, facilities and amenities. So, okay, now I want to put this question to perhaps Mr. Jayaselan. From the policymakers' point of view, is there a housing crisis at the moment?
Definition of housing crisis depends on who we are talking to. You talk to the developer, they say, yes, we're having a housing crisis because the stocks are unsold. So when the stocks are unsold, so their income is affected. So they say it's a crisis. That's why they want HOC. So actually, to us, there is no crisis. This is my personal view. There is no crisis. If you have crisis, that means there's a lot of people are stranded outside without houses. How many people here in this room have no house? They are stranded outside. They cannot go back unless they've been chased or been locked down not locked by the government, locked by the husband or wife. So the answer is none. So the question here is, next question, I'll put it to you. If you buy a house for 300,000 ringgit, after 20 years you sold it for 400,000, do you consider it profit or loss? Profit or loss? 99% of them will say I sold it for profit. But then actually it's loss. If you look at return of investment, how many hours in a day you stay in the house? And how many hours you are actually sleeping on the bed? That means you did not have the opportunity to use the whole house. So why we are looking for, and you are using the house basically to become your garbage place. Because 80% of the things you keep in the house you don't use. It is a showcase. So you look at your investment. So the salesperson here will do a research analysis, because just now Ismail is asking a question, putting your distance and all these things. The answer is not about distance, it's also about investment. Because the question, how much you calculate the value of money when you're on the road. You're stuck in the road, you're traveling 1 hour. If that 1 hour is with your family, what is the value? If the 1 hour is lost, what is the value? Have anybody calculated all these things before buying a house? This is a real way of calculating cost of benefit. That's why sometimes people put that banners, okay, you leave, you can work. I say you can leave, you cannot work, because you work not in the place where you're living. For an example, I just give you another thing, is that because are we building the school in the right place or wrong place? My question is always build the school in the wrong place. Which one is more efficient? To build a school near the working place or build the school near the house? Parents are outside. When the teachers call, you have to run back to the location where you bought the house because they are staying there. So see, how much is the cost loss? So this is what I calling affordability living. That means your living value. What is your living value? So nobody calculate actually this living value. So actually the crisis is not crisis of houses, crisis of living. Today most of us have a touch base only because only lucky your handphone is working. So most 90% of you are not looking at your handphone than looking at us, because that is how we run our life. Huh? Okay? You go to toilet also with your handphone, not with your house. Okay? So if you see this, the crisis is not actually on house, the crisis on livability. How many of you are thinking every minute how much you owe today? How much you need to make money? Anybody is looking at affordability? Nobody. So this is the crisis actually. The crisis is different place, but we are looking for answers in different place. I'll just answer Ismail just now. He's looking at Malay Reserve land. Actually for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, Dr. Suraya knows because she's with us now. We are actually doing laws, act for housing. Actually we are doing Wakaf land. There is 30,000 hectares of land untapped. So we are doing law for creating, to take an opportunity. The other one we are doing is also on Malay Reserve land for the last 2 years. Hopefully next year we can resolve it. Okay. On the military land we are not agreeable. We have to see it on security reasons. Business perspective, yes. We have to know this country's terrain for security first, because from business point of view is different, from security is different. So we have to understand that perspective, so we are not touching that part. But the rest of the land, we are touching. So hopefully from next year onward, we can see new laws are coming out. For your information, since 1966 until today, we are only using one law to create, talking about housing. After this, from 2021 or 2022, we might be looking at 5 laws to talk about housing. And for your information also, actually affordability is not today's issue. The first affordability issue started in 1952. Housing Trust Fund. 1952, that means way before Singapore. Way before Singapore. Singapore started in 1965, but we started in 1952. But the follow-through is the question. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Jaya. So that answers your question, Ishmael, whether the Malay Reserve land is being unlocked. And besides the so-called suggestion by Ismail on the army camps, perhaps besides army camp, for security reasons, we can't touch it. But what about institutional land that has been actually abandoned and not being used? by the federal government. I understand there are quite a number as well. All right.
Institutional lands are moving. There's some have been taken up. There's cross-subsidy or exchange. I think Datoko here done one already, where they shifted the Bangsa NHS National Hospital, this one to Setia Alam. So this is methodology is actually taking place, and it's a private developers are doing it. It's working well. And okay, there's one comment on 24 Prima, which has been cancelled. It's actually business model problem. So I just stopped there. Then the rest you figure out why.
Okay. So actually, so from what you're saying that we don't have a housing crisis, okay. So and you have also mentioned that this affordability issue has been there for so many years. Just like what Ishmael said, that since you're how many years old, and we have been talking about affordability. But why the obsession with affordability?
Okay, just give you a small this one. How many developers are here in crisis rate? They are going to be wind out. Any company going to wind up? But they say they are having difficulty. How many company when they publish their book annual report says their rate? See, nobody want to answer. But at the end of the day, what they are saying? Wow. You must help us, you must help us. So are we helping the right people? Who we should help? So this is the things we have to think, Who should we help, how we should help, and why we should help. Because development expenditure is to create progressive. Operational expenditure is to create expenditure to sustain your daily. That means, should we use development expenditure to create operational purpose, or should we create progressiveness? So this is what Dr. Carmelo is also highlighting. So let us answer that. So yesterday I was listening to a video. They will use the word MPH. Meritocracy. Here I say meritocracy for the poor people. The right people must have the help must reach at the right people. That is the meritocracy. Is it? Okay. So pragmatic, that's the one we are talking about today, the models and all that. We have to mix and match. H is honesty, not, this is MPH, honesty. Are we honest in what we are asking for? Are we honest in suggesting? Or we are suggesting something for our own personal benefit or for the organizational benefit? We are saying we have to develop the nation, build the nation. Our suggestion is for the nation development or for our personal gain?
Okay. All right, maybe the next question I would like to address to Dr. Suraya. So because we have been talking about affordability and then B40, M40 not able to afford housing and everything. But is home ownership that important? Or is housing the population more important?
Again, historically, so to answer that question, you have to look into the nature of cities and towns in our country. How to say this? You see, when cities are competitive, when towns can give jobs, because shelter is also about when you have jobs, people want to stay there. When you want to stay there, depending on the time that you think you will be staying there, you want to buy a house or you rent for a long time. It depends on the family, family or, a lot of calculation. So now, we've been looking at the regional disparities of Malaysia. And it appears as if the places that happens to create more jobs is just scattered around Greater KL as well as a little bit in Penang. Johor is not, whoever is in regional corridor, which is part of Khazanah, well, this is not performing that well within these 5-6 years. So when you put really high-priced houses over there, who would buy all these houses? So this is the mismatch, of course. And when all your resources and everybody wants to come to KL, of course they would want to buy in KL. So it's not for us to say, is home ownership good for you or not, or is it not great for you? It's about people saying that I will stay here, my children will stay here because there's no other place that could create jobs. And therefore, before prices really go up, might as well buy a house here. So these are people's choices. These are people's tactical moves or prudent moves in order to ensure that they and their family can live comfortably, decent housing in the place that they want to reside and work. Now, if we don't free up all cities in our country to ensure that people can have the same opportunity to work in, say, Kuala Kangsar or Greek, then definitely this thing about affordability will always remain in Greater KL and to a certain extent Pulau Pinang. So these are the issues that are contingent to affordability, not affordability, because what is affordability but not your wages as well as your and cost of living as well as your house prices. So in order to answer that question, is it home ownership, or Dr. Carmelo said, is it looking at your debt? We need to look into the structural issues of cities and towns. How are they performing? One thing I like about looking at history is that in 1969, and then came 1970, there were a lot of issues then, and therefore there was a lot of movement from the rural to urban area KL, because there was an issue about ensuring that we had a balanced number of people in Kuala Lumpur. But when people were asked to come into Kuala Lumpur, there were not enough jobs for the new people that were going to be in Kuala Lumpur. And it appears as if, Tuan Jaya, you were not there yet maybe, but that government policy then created a wage disparity, because you just put people there without proper jobs. Some were absorbed into government civil servant, some were not. But this is not following proper economic consideration. Economic consideration says that if a city, Kuznets theory, that if a city has more jobs, create more jobs, then people will come in. And therefore, you will have proper houses, proper jobs. But if you just put people in without the proper houses, proper jobs, then the houses will be created in such a way that it will not be decent. And we have all this policy consideration then that has an impact now. So for me, if you ask me, I think we should do away with low-cost public housing. We should just do away with creating substandard housing just so we get the numbers game right. I agree with Dr. Carmelo, yes. We should make sure that this is decent houses. And when I say decent houses, then we look at down market penetration ratio. What is so difficult for the private sector to then give decent housing at an affordable price following the wage structure for the M40? This is not happening, by the way, in most cities. That's why if you look at 2017, 16, 15, the government intervened by providing prima houses. This is not the business of the government to provide for M40. But because the private sector couldn't, who's the developer here, couldn't, then the government stepped in. And then, based on that, then the private sector was buffered from provision of housing to the M40. They went to the 320, and they went for foreign buyers. So by certain government policies created the unintended consequences of making it even worse off for an inefficient supply sector. So I think we should just go post-pandemic. So now we are still in the pandemic. This is the time for us to realign all our policies. go back to basics. Make sure our houses are decent in terms of gross floor area, in terms of quality. That means the construction industry must make sure that we don't supply shoddy workmanship. Shoddy workmanship, siapa punya salah? Siapa yang buat claim, ratify progress claim? Professionals, right? Professionals should also back up. You shouldn't ratify shoddy workmanship. Because shoddy workmanship you give to house buyers, then they would need maintenance, and therefore affordability issue jadi 30% of housing cost burden because it's existing stock. So all of us, all sectors, all players, all professionals must come together, especially during this time when we should realign our objectives to ensure that our citizens get the best from our local housing sector. This is the best time to do it because now there's a lot of penjana, all these things are trying to help to ensure that we come back, calibrate all our development strategies back to making sure that we give very good products to our people. I think that's, thank you.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. But I'll reserve that to the audience later to perhaps, I'm sure there are a lot of developers out there. We'll put that for a later discussion. I'll come to Dr. Carmelo. Just now in your slides, I think you mentioned something about the secondary market supply. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. If I look at some recent research, there is not only a growing interest from the people in the secondary market, but also a big majority of the transactions that are doing in the property market are indeed in the secondary market. And this is normal. Malaysia is no more a new country. Stock has built, people move, buy and sell. But when we discuss about overhang, when we discuss affordability, when we discuss projects, I think that the discussion is a bit unbalanced on the primary market, and probably we should bring back the secondary market into the discussion, because for what I heard also from developers and from buyers, indeed the situation from the price perspective in the secondary market is much more rosy. So indeed there are affordable solutions for, in particular for the M40, so for the middle class. And this is the normal direction that is taken in a developed country. If you go to Europe, it's very normal to buy a second-hand house, and houses are built to last. So there is also a different construction strategy, also due to weather conditions. Of course, here we are lucky; we don't need to face snow and winter. But if I look at the working class house where my parents live in Italy, which was built 75 years ago, something like that, or 50 years ago, is in much better conditions than the house where I live in Malaysia, which is pretty baru-baru. So also here, probably we should make a consideration in order to develop houses that are built to last, and therefore they create an even more vibrant secondary market. So we don't really need to have, we have an aging population, less children, so we don't really need new projects. Probably by building properly what has been built, that houses can be there for the long run and fuel a vibrant and quality secondary market, an affordable secondary market.
Okay, thank you. Ishmael, you have anything to add on?
Yes, of course. Giving the suggestion, I have to defend what I just suggested, right? So I have to tango a bit with Mr. Jayaselan, if I may. So very good. Just now, when I talk about Malay Reserve, you mentioned Wakaf Land, which of course very good initiative. In fact, several years back when I talked about it, I think it was the PKNS people was also looking at Malay Reserve during development, etc. But I want to go one step further and say do we even need that status? So that is the conversation I want to have. So it is very sensitive. Nobody wants to talk about it. Malay has, generally speaking, not all Malays, my fellow Malay friends have generally made up their mind, oh, of course, perlu. And then my non-Malay friends are so scared to talk about it. We felt that this is a topic for the Malays. But we are all fellow Malaysian. It's a conversation that we should be having. Now, why I'm talking about it is, yes, you cannot run away from it being very political. But as simple as you have a land, you put restriction, then the use is limited. As simple as that. So my question is, will we still maintain these laws while you have young professionals, your younger generation need to be closer to the city? Of course, there's technology, whatnot, work from home. But at the end of the day, proximity is key, very important. Urban sprawl is not the solution. Developer can keep building further and further and further. But it's not a very good solution. So what I'm trying to say is, anyone would we please have the conversation? If we are not having it now, I'm just perhaps bringing the conversation earlier. Maybe the conversation will be very different 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road. But we have to get it started, right? So my grandfather's time, it was that. Of course, we understood. Then my father's time is, of course, there's also baggage. Then my time, perhaps not many changes would be made, if at all. But then my kids, their future, the conversation. So I'm just bringing the conversation earlier. But if you are also scared to talk about this topic or offended very easily, macam mana kita nak progress, kan? So it's a conversation. It's not to impose ideology or whatnot. Right? So that is on Malay Reserve. Because from a mapper perspective, I tengok banyak opportunity, banyak potensi. Yet, we have a lot of own government control initiative. Kami tak ada tanah. I've provided service for both sides, for the GOC, GLC, and also the proposer. And every time we provide a service for them, it becomes very ad hoc. Say like, why very ad hoc? I mean, sure lah, I get my consultancy fee, I give advice, but everything feels very ad hoc. I would love to play a bigger role in that sense. Now, coming back to army camp, I know the immediate response, people will say national security, same thing. We check out for safety, conversation habis. Nobody's going to talk about it. But then we ask, the decision to place these army camps, how long ago was it made? How different has technology in terms of security, in terms of warfare? If Singapore can place their fighter jets in other countries as their strategy, do we really need to have physical immediate army in the urban area? And it doesn't take much to look at the whole thing in a very funny perspective. You can go to Sentul, you go to Sentul Point, you go to the bangunan, without any technology, you just naik bangunan, you can see the army camp, cantonment. So where is your strategic positioning of your army if I can see where your tanks are, where your camps are, So this kind of decision, I'm not saying do away with army camp. You can relocate. And then the ones that I mentioned, you will notice there are a lot of land use are very low rise. 1 story, 2 story. So you can further enhance. There's a lot of land that can be just put a shuttle bus or offshoot of LRT. There's a lot of valuable land. So my question is, it's just maybe a matter of time if someone were to do something in terms of housing perspective. But my fear is that it will just be monetized in the shortest perspective. Okay, biggest, highest tender, then that developer parcel out, make some money, and what happened to affordable housing? Oh, cantik lah ada bangunan, that's about it lah. So that is my fear. I'm being very idealistic. Federal government, state government, everyone can come together. Okay, let's allocate. Here are the places for affordable housing. These are existing LRT, existing MRT too, offshoots and whatnot. So it's clear on the map, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are a bit tight for time, but I would like to open it to the floor to perhaps, thank you very much to the panelists for very interesting ideas and inputs. But I would now like to open up to the floor for any Q&A or any suggestion, ideas, or any rebuttal to any of the panelists. Please. Yes, Mr. Soma.
Good afternoon. It's interesting to hear from an Italian about our secondary market in Malaysia. Because we in the Malaysian Institute of Estate Agents have written to the government many a times to focus on the secondary market, but it has always been primary. Everything has been primary, so it's quite interesting your views. My question is both to the government, Mr. Jaya, and also to Dr. How do we go about stimulating the secondary market? Because it is 80%, 75 to 80% of the transactions in Malaysia are secondary, while new primary properties are only around 20-25. How can you go about stimulating the market in terms of affordability and that movement of, the transactions away from these new properties?
Well, you just mentioned that 75 to 80% of the transaction is in the secondary market, so probably doesn't need to be stimulated because it's already there. But kidding apart, so it means, probably you have followed my ideas. You know that I strongly believe that the people in the markets find their own way. So the numbers that you mentioned testify that the buyers and the seller already found their ways in the secondary market. So don't need for any further intervention on that, because people are in the market, so they know that there are these opportunities in the market. This is the first point. What probably can be done in addition is only a change in the narrative. Okay, a change in the conversation and a change in the narrative that can help a change of mentality. But this, I strongly believe, that somehow is going to happen, with or without stimuli from the government. The mentality follow its own course. And I have said this before, in example, the young generation now, the people between 25 and 40, are people that are living in a mentality transition. That's why I keep on talking about freedom of choice, because this generation is somehow squeezed between two approaches. The traditional approach that say buy a house as soon as possible, so the mentality of the grandparents, the common wisdom, but also the desire of the youth to travel, to be around, to be mobile, to look for job opportunities elsewhere. So probably that generation now wants both, because they are living in a moment in which they are exposed to both approaches. Tapi tak boleh, yeah? Have to choose satu saja. And sooner or later, this mentality transition will be completed, and probably we will observe a shift of preferences toward rental, in order to afford mobility. This doesn't mean that rental is better or buying is better. It's a matter of choices. So let the people choose. And this mentality switch, this preference, like the preference for the secondary market, will happen anyhow.
Thank you very much. We have, yes, gentlemen.
Michael O. from CEO World Academy. Just want to mention that the words of wisdom of Dr. Suraya has been overruled by political consideration. That was why you had this situation. Thank you very much.
I have to speak on behalf of my architects and all our consultants. I think housing affordability is quite a complex issue, and I'm really pleased to have heard all the many aspects of ownership versus change of mindset, as Jayaselan mentioned. There's going to be that certain percentage, and it's a matter of having people shift their mindset to rental housing as opposed to everyone wanting to build a house. But certainly, one of the architects also are often looked at as one of the potential solutions in terms of use of IBS, but I think we've overlooked some of the hidden costs of housing production. There's a lot of hidden costs. I've heard the developers complain about it, cost of utilities, bringing utilities into new developments, and the whole designation, and what I've always also talked about, the disparity of planning, zoning and planning that has actually resulted in a lot of housing development being developed as commercial, and housing owners then taking on the long-term cost of owning a house or owning a home on commercial properties. So there are many, many solutions needed. But certainly to lay one of the issues on the quality of work being attributed to professional certifying, I think that's not quite right. I think professionals do certify. You have certain standards, and we've been entrusted with that duty. I do invite you to many of our building sites to come and see the work that we do. I think the whole quality of construction is very complex. We are so dependent on foreign labor, but that's nothing wrong with that really for the time being. I think it's the issue of training. I think that's a lot of need to train contractors, need to spend more time training their workspeople, the tradespeople, and to build pride in building, in craftsmanship. In the old days, we had guilds for all sorts of trades, whether you're a plasterer, a tile layer, a carpenter. We've lost pride in doing this sort of work, so it just gets to general workers housing, general workers building it, and we import them from wherever, and they were probably fishermen and farmers before, and suddenly have to lay bricks and do plastering. So if we look at how the people actually do some of that and start to rebuild pride in basic trades, and that's when income levels will start to go up, quality will start to go up, and perhaps Suraya will then not think that architects doing poor certification is an issue there.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have a very lively chat discussion. There are a lot of issues out there because sustainability and affordability is really a complex issue, all right? But we are, with time constraint. I think we have exceeded the time allotted by 5 minutes. So I would like to thank all the panelists today for their inputs, for their, the insights into affordable housing issue. Thank you very much.